Hi YouTube, welcome back and happy Friday. I wanted to do a bit of a different type of video today. And this is something I'm asked about all the time. It's definitely the most common movement that people are wanting to really work towards at the moment. And this is the humble pull-up. And it really is such a great goal to have. I speak to loads of you all the time about working towards that first bodyweight rep. What I wanted to do is kind of give you a detailed guide as to what I would do if I was starting from kind of that baseline level, can't yet do one unassisted rep, but I've been working towards it for a while, but I don't necessarily have any of that structure or kind of clear pathway to getting to that rep, other than just kind of jumping up to the bar and giving it a go every now and again and realizing that I'm not moving, right? And that is the thing about pull-ups. You're not really going to get your first rep just by jumping up to the bar and giving it a go. Like, there does need to be a bit of that groundwork put in around the foundations needed for a strong pull-up. And it doesn't by any means need to be a really specific training plan that you follow, but you are going to need to get some basic pull-up progressions into your training on a regular basis, being really consistent with that if you're wanting to see that first rep come through, and then obviously building from there. So I'm really going to be taking you from 0 to your very first pull-up. And obviously where you start on this scale is obviously going to depend on your start point. But I'm going to try to cover all of the bases regardless of where you are starting from. So I'm going to cover off the foundations that you need around those key areas of strength, some really helpful progressions that I will always include when coaching pull-ups, training frequency, things you want to avoid, and a bit of a roadmap for testing your first rep. I'm going to go through some clips of me doing all of the drills that I'm going to talk through so you can really get a feel of what it looks like and the kind of form that you're wanting to adapt. Let's get into it. Just want to do a little bit of expectation setting at the start. With a pull-up, I feel like it's a little bit like the marathon training of the gym world, in that everyone and their dog is running a marathon all of a sudden. And as much as that's incredible, we need to remember it's not the norm, right? You shouldn't necessarily expect yourself to just be able to do a pull-up. Just because you see loads of people on Instagram doing it, it is objectively a very difficult movement. If you cannot do a pull-up, you are not in the minority, particularly for women. I remember when I first stepped into the gym, I'd see like 16, 17-year-old boys just jump up to a bar and be able to whack out at least 5 bodyweight pull-ups. And it's so frustrating in a way, because it kind of feels like a lot of the time it can come pretty naturally, particularly for men with more muscle mass, more ability to build muscle mass, more baseline strength, and also usually having more of that upper body muscle when we compare directly to the average woman, right? They kind of have a bit of an easier time getting to that first rep. Not to say everyone can just do a pull-up, but a lot of men can. And I guess I just wanted to put it out there that if you are a woman who is currently struggling to get their first pull-up, that you're not just weak, right? It definitely does take a lot of time to build. It's something you need to just stay super consistent and stubborn and relentless with in order to get there. And it is also a skill. As much as you do need a good baseline level of strength, there's definitely an element of skill and technique in there too that I think is underrated at times. We're starting from the beginning and we are building the foundation. When we think about a pull-up, the main areas that we need to build a good amount of strength in are the back, the muscles of the back. So the lats and the muscles of the upper back, the biceps, and also the core. When we think about all of those areas, really the place that we begin is making sure that we have that good strength output in all of those muscle groups. So we can train the muscles of the back using any kind of row. A pull down, a seated row, a single arm row, anything where your elbow is traveling backwards behind the body in various degrees. And if you want to make that work that you do around your back muscles quite pull-up specific, then you can absolutely focus on things like pull downs, okay? So like a wide grip pull down or an underhand grip pull down, either or. Inverted rows are a fantastic place to start, again, because you're actually moving your body weight. And this is the thing we want to get really good at, practicing moving our body through space. Resistance in the form of plates or dumbbells are, of course, really helpful, You're still going to build strength and muscle from doing that, but nothing quite compares to kind of actually starting to practice moving your body through space. Inverted rows using perhaps a Smith machine or a barbell or TRX cables is a really great place to start. The stronger you get with that, the lower you can get to the ground. You can start off pretty high in this kind of horizontal position, pulling yourself towards the squat rack, the TRX, whatever it is. As you get stronger, you can aim to get closer to kind of horizontal. The closer you are to the ground, the more of your relative body weight you're going to be lifting. We can also do things like seated pull-ups. Again, this really closely mimics what a pull-up actually looks like. You're in a vertical position, your hands are overhead, you're pulling your elbows down towards the ground, and you're having to use an element of that core stability to kind of keep you still underneath the bar. You can make these harder by using one leg. You can elevate your feet to make that even more challenging. But I would definitely recommend prioritizing some heavy row type work, as well as some rowing patterns where you're actually moving your body weight through space. We also want to be building some strength around the biceps and elbow flexors. So the thing that bends the elbow. In either a pull-up or a chin-up, there is going to be an element of elbow flexors and biceps doing some work here to help you. In a chin-up variation, generally these are slightly easier and you'll tend to get this first before you get your first overhand grip pull-up. Again, if we're aiming for a chin-up initially, we're going to want to really prioritize some of that bicep work so that we have the strength in that muscle group to support us. You can definitely add in some direct isolated bicep work like curls, hammer curls, cable bicep curls, anything where you are training that bicep muscle predominantly. You're also going to get an element of bicep in any of your rowing work because we are bending the elbow. Any row, single arm row, cable row, pull down, you are going to still be getting some of that bicep stimulation there. But I definitely recommend some accessory bicep isolation. And then the most underrated muscle group for pull-up strength is your core, okay? The muscles of the abdominals and trunk in general. It's really important that we prioritize building a really strong core. Having some direct ab-focused work within your training makes a lot of sense, but also some more specific kind of pull-up focused core work could be in the form of hollow body holds, dead bugs, plank variations, anything where you're needing to keep your torso really, really straight against resistance. In a plank, for example, gravity is trying to push your hips down, but you're trying to resist and stay in this plank type position. That is all going to be helpful when we're thinking about getting towards that pull-up. Because if you're trying to pull from a place of looseness and you don't have that tight torso position, it is going to make your job so much harder. The more stable and secure and strong we are in that hanging position, the easier it's going to be to pull your body weight. If you've been training a little while, you've been doing a lot of back work, bicep work, core work, and you feel like you've got a really good level of that foundational strength. Maybe you're in a position where your inverted rows are really strong, your seated pull-ups are strong, you've got that fundamental core strength that's needed, then it is definitely the time to be getting you hanging from a bar and starting to actually work in the start position that you're going to need for that pull-up. When it comes to hanging drills, again, we want to start with the basics. Hanging hollow body holds are a really good thing to start incorporating in order to just get your body used to hanging from a bar, being able to support yourself through your shoulder and grip strength, and also maintaining a kind of dish-like position in the air. When I'm doing a hollow body hold, like in this video here, I'm thinking about trying to close the gap between my sports bra and my leggings. So I don't want this arched type position where I've got a big gap between the two. Instead, I want to close that gap and keep my feet slightly in front of me, trying to mimic like a banana or a dish. This is the first hanging progression that I would strongly recommend you get comfortable with, because also pull-ups are going to require some pretty decent grip strength. If you physically can't hold your weight because your hands are slipping, then that's going to be an issue when it comes to trying to get that first pull-up. Hanging is definitely where I would begin. with some of those hollow body position holds in order to build that kind of core position that we want and that strength through the shoulder and forearms. Something you can add in side by side with your hanging progression is some scapular pull-ups. With this particular drill, what we're aiming to do is create movement at the shoulder blade, but not through the elbow. We're not yet trying to pull and bend the elbow. Instead, we're allowing the shoulder to come all the way up beside the ear, and then you're aiming to pull the shoulder away from the ear. We're trying to create this movement through the back of my shoulder blades, as you can see in this video here. And with this, I'm not only thinking about that shoulder girdle movement, but I'm also thinking about changing my intention with where my body is going. At the top of the rep, I'm not just staying hanging and moving through the shoulder, I'm actually trying to lift and point my chest up towards the bar. So creating some of that movement through the shoulder blades is going to be really key when it comes to actually putting it all together and being able to pull yourself all the way up. Next, you can move on to training the different stages of your pull-ups. Now we've looked at what needs to happen through that bottom portion of the movement, it makes sense for us to look at what happens at the top. I really love adding in a progression where you jump, so you don't necessarily need to use all that much strength. You can either jump or you can use like a really high platform so that you can just step off. But the aim is then to grip onto the bar and pull yourself into the bar, holding that top position for as long as you feasibly can. I'd recommend aiming for kind of 15 seconds. In the video, I've got an overhand grip. This is harder. If you wanted to start off with an underhand grip, you can absolutely do that. We're thinking about trying to drive the elbows down towards the ground and really pull the bar into our body at the top. Again, still thinking about the core. The core still needs to be strong here. We don't want to be swinging around whilst trying to hold on. That hollow type position is really important. Then you can start looking at working partial ranges. For example, going from that dead hang position into a half pull-up, aiming to create roughly 90 degrees at the elbow and then going all the way back down to full extension. So aiming to train just that bottom half. You can do the same with just the top half. You can start at that 90 degrees and then aim to come all the way in to the top of the bar. We're trying to work different phases of the movement. The more practice you get in doing that, the more easy it will become to piece all of those things together and for it to become one fluid motion. I also love just training the eccentric phase of a movement. So training the eccentric is going to be slightly easier than the concentric. So the up phase, the concentric of any movement, is the hardest. You're always going to be a little bit stronger in that eccentric or lowering phase of any movement. Training through that negative portion on the way down is a great way of building overall pull-up strength. It also really encourages you to keep that core super still so that, again, you're not kind of swinging around whilst you're lowering your body. The core is really important here. Now at this stage, it might be useful to start adding in some band-assisted pull-ups. But what I don't love is just sending someone into a gym who's trying to get their first pull-up, who has never done any progressions towards a pull-up at all, to just stick a really heavy band around their foot and go for some band-assisted reps. Really, you're not learning a huge amount about that core element, and you're not really doing kind of the movement specific drills that I personally prefer from a coaching perspective. Once you've got some of that fundamental strength, you're doing your half reps, you're doing your eccentrics, you're doing your isometric holds, you're doing your hanging hollow body holds, then for sure, add in some band assisted reps because you've already built some of that kind of foundational stuff that's actually going to move the needle towards you doing it on your own. And really, in most cases, if you're using like the thickest band in the gym to do your band assisted reps, it's probably a case of your time being better spent doing the progressions that I've just mentioned until you can use a lighter band that quite literally is just helping you out of the bottom a little bit. Now, again, as I said, chin-ups are a little bit easier. So you can do any and all of these with that underhand grip to begin with, just to make things ever so slightly easier. Now I've run through some of my favorite progressions towards a pull-up. How do you actually implement that into your training? And this is where a lot of people tend to go wrong. They either like do pull-ups every day until it feels like their arms are going to fall off, or they'll try it once, be like, I can't do this, and then not do it again for another 3 weeks. With any skill, you do have to practice, and practice makes progress. Regular enough to build the skill and the strength, but really the element of skill here, but not so regular that every time you go in, you seem to be getting worse because you've got no time to recover in between. Doing some form of pull-up progression, maybe 2 to 3 times a week, makes sense if it's a priority for you. If it really is the priority in your training plan, then really we should be doing something to get better at that a couple of times a week. If you're a real beginner with this, then little and often probably works a bit better. You might just go in and do a set of inverted rows and then a set of hanging hollow body holds and some direct bicep work and some direct kind of pull-up progressive work from the floor, like your seated pull-ups. You might be able to do that 4 times a week, right? The odd thing here and there, little and often. If you are more advanced and you already have a good amount of that foundational strength, then I would say 2 to 3 times a week is probably the sweet spot for you. And then when it comes to volume and how you kind of split that up over your week, you might want to think about something in the realm of 3 to 4 sets of 6 to 10 assisted reps. That could either be your band assisted or your kind of half reps or your seated pull-ups, and then maybe closer to 3 to 6 reps of those negatives because they're really, really taxing. We're really thinking about quality over quantity. And again, with pull-ups, like anything, you do need to implement that progressive overload. Let's say you're using your banded reps because you're already pretty far down your pull-up journey track. Use thinner bands over time. As soon as it gets even slightly comfortable, reduce the assistance given from that band. If you're doing your negatives, aim to add seconds to the time it takes you to get to the bottom of that rep. Add reps to any of your rowing movements. And then once you get to a point where you've got 2 to 3 clean-ish pull-ups, then we can start focusing on building volume. This is quite hard to do because everyone is so individual, but I'm going to try and give like a rough 8-week roadmap for someone who has already a good amount of that foundational strength, but hasn't really had the chance yet to add in any of that structure around their specific pull-up progression. Strong back, strong biceps, strong core, but maybe hasn't spent any time doing specific progressive work towards getting that first rep using kind of hanging progressions, etc. Weeks 1 to 2, focus on adding in your dead hangs, your scapular pull-ups, and your inverted rows. Weeks 3 to 4, you could then look at adding in your negatives, your isometric holds, and some specific heavy rowing and core work. Weeks 5 to 6, you could work on your partials, so either halfway here or halfway here. Add in some of those band assisted pull-ups, again with a light band, some super, super slow negatives. And then weeks 7 to 8, you could look at starting your pull-up progressions for that week with just seeing what happens if you hang from a bar, really aiming to get a rep or get some movement through that rep at least. Maybe film it, see how much movement you got, if any. If we're not getting to a point where we're seeing you get over that kind of halfway mark, then we're not there quite yet and we can go back to the beginning. Adding in the dead hangs, adding in the more difficult inverted rows, really progressively overloading on your rows and your core work. Hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of the things you need to do, how often you need to do them, the variety of progressions that I would suggest including. And remember that particularly with pull-ups, I don't even have a scientific study to refer to here. This is just anecdotal. But one week you might feel like actual Wonder Woman, and the next you might feel like I am so much worse than I was last week. Because there is a lot, when it comes to pull-ups, a lot of it is down to where your head is at too, okay? If you haven't had a good night's sleep, feeling particularly stressed, just about to come on your period, anything like that, you can find that your overall ability to even think about doing bodyweight pull-ups can really, really vary. Make sure that you're taking notice of that and kind of trying to compare yourself on days where you feel similar and the environment itself is comparable. And also, I hate to break it to you, but that first pull-up is a milestone, a big milestone, but it's not the finish line because there is always a way to make things harder. We add reps, we add load. How many weighted pull-ups can we do? Can we add 5, 10, 15, 20 kilos to our pull-ups? There is always a way. And that's what I love about it. As always, let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Love you, bye.